As the game got later into the game, I think the bosses started to get better and better and better. And I like that boss fight a lot if it's not for that fire ability. And Elden Ring does this too, where like nowadays with these sorts of bosses, like I love the boss 90% and then there's one ability that just makes me go, but why? Why'd they do that? And the weird thing is that the first fire ring in that fight makes total sense. A one wave comes out at a time. They are spaced such that you just dodge through, dodge through, dodge through. Very reasonable. And then the second time he does it, there's one ring, and then the second and third ring are like almost, there's like barely any gap such that if you try to dodge through it, you're going to get caught. And then you're set on fire, and then you have to reset the run, which is weird. But yeah, I think there's pressure to make the games challenging in a way, so they create these one abilities. Arlecchino did it, Promise Consort, Millennia, a couple bosses in this game. I don't know, that's like a trend, and I'm like, just don't do it. It's okay if the boss can be fully domed on once it's learned. That's the point. That's the point.
Disclaimer: anything I will be talking about in this video has or might be fixed by a patch. The biggest issue I had with the game was already fixed as of the making of this review. Also, all footage was recorded and I finished the game before the release of the day one patch was applied. So enemy scaling, damage numbers, difficulty, some things might be different than what is in the release version of the game. I will mention this during my points in the video when applicable. Now enjoy the rest of the review.
Who is it at such an hour? You sound strong, powerful. Will you break down my door and show me how big and strong you really are?
Well, it looks like this house has a severe famoid infestation. Gotta burn the whole house down now, nothing else to do here. What a shame. What a shame. Was a really nice cottage home too. Oh well. Nothing more relaxing than taking a bath in a pot after burning a house down. I feel there is a Gen Z joke to make here about like cooking, but I don't really feel like doing it. Also, I think she is quite literally trying to cook me right now. Nothing against the loot in this game, but what about a big beautiful tuber? I hope they got some sexy big beautiful tubers in this game. I'm not giving this game a 10 out of 10 unless I see a tuber somewhere. Welcome, my not schizophrenic goyams, to a review of Mortal Shell 2, also known as Arday's Afterlife Adventure, the story of the true academic perigod. He was so good, he parried himself out of life and now awakes in a strange new world as a totally different creature of pale flesh. Too soon? Is it too soon? Nah, it's never too soon to make fun of a fraudster. Let's go right into the review. Should you play this and should you buy this? Let's talk about the price first. On release, the game will cost you $50. You should never buy advanced access. You are an unpaid beta tester and you pay the developers to fix their shit if you do. Unless you are a reviewer, advanced access and digital deluxe editions are a scam. And for the review, the skins in the digital deluxe edition are irrelevant. So just don't buy it. If the issues are fixed in this game, for $50, the asking price is fine. The playtime is around 40 hours for a full run, including almost everything with a completion rate of close to 90% for a blind playthrough. I think this is a pretty good number. The game also has no DRM of any kind, which is another good thing, and the rest entirely depends on what you take away from the further points in the review. So let's get right along into the biggest part of the video. So sit back, relax, grab a drink, and maybe, if you want to, watch some of the recording. I always find it difficult to discern all of the Unreal Engine 5 shenanigans going on when I'm fighting for my dear life in the game, but I am sure, I am certain, if you look closely, you can see the ghosting, the weird graininess and the fuzzing of typical Unreal Engine graphics. Just kind of what you expect from games like these nowadays, I guess. Gameplay and mechanics. Shells and character leveling upgrades. I need to talk about this first. The system in its first iteration was very, very bad. Almost comically idiotic. Aspects of it have been fixed, which, thank God, you get to play the game with a fixed leveling system. Let's lay it out for you. You have multiple shells to equip. Basically, characters and classes, both in one. You find them in the world. Some are in late game areas, keep this in mind, and some are in early game areas. You don't level the shells up, you only level your character up, the Harbinger. That is what Gloom is for. It is the Souls mechanic. Gold also exists in the game, and it is only used for trading and is not lost on death. Gloom is lost on death and permanently lost on failed retrieval. Gold drops from certain enemies. Usually gold only drops from humanoids because a creature in a cave doesn't have gold on it. But that leads to economy issues later on in the game. Shells need their bond deepened to get access to better upgrades and skills. Some upgrades fundamentally change how the shell works and plays. Some shells feel very bad starting off and only get better, and I mean significantly better, with points committed in their skill trees. However, with all that being said, glimpses are limited, and they used to be wasted in order to locate shells in the world. This now has been fixed and costs only gloom. That's good, but the glimpses are still limited. In addition, remember how you level only your character and not the shell? At certain intervals of levels, you gain a so-called shell point. These can be committed into your shell of choice in order to make a build, in order to activate certain effects. Shell points are not given out at every level, they're given out at certain intervals, every third level or something like that. However, these shell points used to be bound to the shell you played as. So let's say you stick to Teal, the assassin, for a long time. Most of the early game leveling will result in Teal having a lot of points, which you could not commit into other shells to upgrade them and maybe experiment with their builds a little bit. This was also fixed by letting you refund all shell points, and they made them universal, which they should have been in the first place. However, this does not change the fact that this was only fixed after numerous amounts of feedback, and glimpses remain limited. I wonder how the initial system made it into the game in the first place. Limiting build freedom in these types of games seems like pure amateur hour game development to me. I don't know who had the idea to limit build experimentation to that level. Yes, I get it. It encourages multiple playthroughs, but since some shells are only gained late game anyways, you might lock yourself out entirely off of a cool build or a character until New Game Plus. So choose your shell wisely and definitely save your glimpses and maybe hope that they continue to fix this system. Yes, it is good that it was fixed in the first place, but I think in its initial iteration, it showed how much of a clown show the dev studio is, thinking that this was somehow a good idea. And I do not like the system enforcing New Game Plus cycles. Make the gameplay, the world interactivity, maybe even the story do that to the players. Don't force them into New Game Plus by systemic limitation. These systems and this system still limits experimentation with shells due to the limited amounts of glimpses that you need in order to unlock the actual abilities in your build. I only used 3 shells out of all of them, and that is the most amount that you can upgrade on one playthrough. And until shell points were fixed, my sister Ganessa, for example, had full bond strength but had 0 shell points. There were 0 shell points to spend on a build. How stupid is that? Since we are talking about shells here, yes, all of these are different builds, different abilities, and distinct characters with backstories and lore. First we have Eredrim from Mortal Shell 1, who is kind of the same as he was in the first game. For some reason he has 2 active skills and a passive, much more than some of the other shells get. No idea what this is about. Not every shell has 2 skills, and he is all around an aggressive tank with lots of break bar damage and stagger, and he can execute enemies. But I didn't have enough glimpses to level him up and to try out a build, so I didn't play. Then there is sort of a secret shell, I guess, that is Sester Ganessa, who I think has the best visual design out of all of them. Her build is all around clones and doppelgangers. She summons, and she has very definitively a specific place in the lore because she is not the Harbinger, she is her own character, and she actually can talk with NPCs. So actually playing with her might give you some interesting interaction all around the game. Also, when she dies, she doesn't revert to the Harbinger, she reverts to an alter ego of herself, which has an entirely different set of abilities. A pretty cool character, which I would have liked to play more, but at that point, you know, the glimpse and the shell point system wasn't fixed. Then there is Gragu, who knows the fastest way to a man's heart and also has a mean punch. Very important to mention here, this is one of the characters that plays weird and feels very weak early on. Why? Because his health mechanic is that he eats the hearts of his enemies and he starts with only 3 hearts or health potions, so to say. He can have more later on, but the base healing feels like shit early on. Yes, you can get them back by killing people, but the health you gain from healing feels like it's almost nothing. Unfortunately, again, I did not have enough glimpses to try out a full build. That's going to be a running theme here. Laszlo is next. He destroys enemies with his enormous colossal fart attacks, and he is just overall a big fat tank that uses fire as his damage type. And again, I have not much to say about him because I could not upgrade the guy, and unupgraded Laszlo is kind of just a big health bar punching bag. That's all he is. Proxima is the Guna bait character, and she quite literally is an alien. Yes, she is actually literally an Alemau from space, and she will probe your ass. This was, I guess, my main tank character that I played. You get her early on, and if you have the shell points to invest, her hookshot gets ridiculously strong later on. You can do intense lightning damage, and you can slow down bosses, and that shit is spammable as hell, and she likely is one of the most tanky characters out there due to her damage mitigation. Sariel is probably my least played shell. He is all the way in the endgame at the bottom of the map, and I guess he has a Bloodborne healing mechanic built into his abilities, and he can spread the plague. And he's also very, very evil. Smurt, the punching monk, is a shell that I would have liked to invest points into, as he can not only stop time and go full JoJo mode, later on he just can forgo all weapons and punch enemies to death. I would have really liked to try this guy out, but again, the game arbitrarily limits build variety, so better luck next time for me, or rather, you know, it's time for New Game Plus, I guess. And lastly, there's Teal, the character you will see the most of in this review. He is a specialist in the Londoner special greeting method and can go invisible. By the way, in my humble opinion, Teal is much stronger than some people make him out to be. He genuinely breaks enemy AI. Maybe they will fix that at some point, but some bosses literally turn brain dead when you go invisible on them. Teal absolutely can carry in this game. Sadly, I did not have enough glimpses to show you all abilities and unique builds, and until New Game Plus, I cannot upgrade any other shells. I am literally out of glimpses, and I don't think there are more in the game. Why don't the shells level up on their own while being played? Why is this bound to your character levels? No idea. There is some great potential build variety in the game, it's just severely limited by the idiotic shell point and glimpse system. Thankfully it was fixed for release, but I did not have fun with this, and I would have made this one of the biggest letdowns of the entire game. If you play this game now, at least it's fixed. You know, they let you switch the points from one shell to another. Still, it's kind of cumbersome and limited, but at least it's something. And yes, the fully fleshed out builds are completely awesome in this game. It totally changes some of the characters and how they play. Shame that I couldn't get the full experience. I guess I might have to do another playthrough now. On to the weapons system. Weapons and weapon upgrading. For some reason, they did it right with the weapons and guns in this game. Yeah, there are only a few, but you can refund all the crafting materials and then you can spend them on a different weapon. This used to cost a shit ton of gloom, as in souls, but it was made 75% cheaper. Almost as if making respecking expensive as hell is a shitty idea. Right, devs? Am I right about that? Anyway, the weapons. Melees first. Well, I gotta be honest, I wasn't too impressed with some of the melee weapons in this game. Especially the slow heavy weapons feel unsafe and punishing to use for no real benefit, and some of the damage kind of feels like it's completely inconsistent. You're swinging a giant greatsword, but me swinging a dinky little axe and a dagger feels like I'm actually doing more DPS. Some of the heavy weapons have specific running attacks. These are good, but just kind of spamming running attacks feels severely restrictive. Certain heavy attacks also just kind of feel bad to use. In short, the axe-katana and the axe and the dagger are pretty good, especially since these can be upgraded to have all of their attacks hit twice, besides the heavy attack. Just don't use the heavy attack on these weapons. The battle axe is fine, the beginner greatsword is fine too, the hammer and ultra greatsword kind of feel bad and they have already been buffed. And the scythe is kind of a specialty weapon. It has a very interesting heavy running attack and it is an almost 360-degree hit range. Pretty good for kind of an overall AoE melee hit build. The spear feels really good and extremely fast, but it has the most hitbox issues. Yes, the game has hitbox problems. It's a Soulslike, of course there's hitbox issues. Who would have guessed? And certain attacks will just outright miss, and the stabbing attacks of the spear are the worst example for this. The ranged weapons, on the other hand, I found totally irrelevant, especially later on in the game. Why? This game uses a universal resource for skills, spells, weapon skills, and ranged weapons. It's called Resolve. You use Resolve to cast your shell abilities, you use them for the special charged weapon attacks, and you use them to buff your weapons, and the same resource is used to fire your guns, which the guns don't do all that much, especially later on in the game. The base shotgun is fine. The crossbow was actually pretty useful to take out all of the traps and explosives. The axe catapults sounded like a cool idea, but the charge time on the projectiles just kind of put me off and the damage isn't really high enough. The bazooka is okay, but it only has 2 shots and it takes forever to take the weapon out. Then there is a child in a cage that screams at people. I guess that's pretty funny, but I didn't really use that weapon, so I can't say much about it. And then there are 2 fully automatic weapons that are actually kind of good for safely triggering things at range, since you only need 1 shot to explode a barrel, to activate a lever, or to pull certain enemies. And these have like 40 to 100 rounds in the magazine. So they are extremely ammo efficient, but they don't do that much in terms of damage. And then there is the loot, which is a neat instrument that confuses enemies, but the confusion doesn't really work most of the time, as the enemies really like aggroing onto you from 50 kilometers away, and then they stay aggroed onto you. Yes, the enemies will forego fighting each other to maul you, and specifically only you to death. Kind of funny, but also extremely weird AI behavior. In short, I use the axe and dagger, the axe katana, and the spear, and all of these melee weapons feel fine and nice to use. And the ranged weapons I didn't use much because I found using my shell abilities much more interesting and impactful. Maybe I will try a ranged build at some point, but honestly, compared to the shells, I don't really feel there's a big use or a point for the ranged weapons, especially late game. Defensive abilities. You have a dodge, to no one's surprise. There is no stamina. The enemies have perilous attacks that need to be dodged, and yes, a lot of these have really tight hitboxes. And then you have so-called seals. These are parry tools or blocking tools. You can harden, like in the first game. If you do it perfectly, you deal breakbar damage and you can immediately turn hard again. This one I used for pretty much the entire game. It's really fucking good. And then you have the block seal. It works like Sekiro. You block until your own bar breaks, or if you do a perfect block, the enemy takes break bar damage. And then there is the parry seal, which apparently was nerfed, and now people are unhappy with its performance. That's a running theme with this game, things being changed and people being unhappy about this. The problem with the parry seal apparently is that the animation is very slow and deliberate, and in the late game, enemies have 300 hit combo attacks that you cannot parry at all because you will be locked into a specific animation. Animation locking is something we need to talk about later in detail. So the parry is the best seal in theory, but apparently it was neutered by the developers, and apparently also the finishing damage, like the eliminations that you can do, they also got their damage nerfed. Again, I didn't play the beta or the demo, so I don't know. I just didn't use the parry seal much because I just liked the harden ability more. And then there is the Slayer seal, which turns the game into easy mode apparently and disables all achievements, and I didn't use it because I didn't see a reason to do so. Then we have Tarstones and Tarstone upgrading, and this is where possibly a lot of the balance shenanigans and overpowered builds might come from. This is where the additional upgrade materials come in. Tarstone upgrades can give you anything for your character, for your weapon, for your ranged weapon. They can give you passive buffs, they can give you skills on weapons, they can give you skills on guns, they can give you effects, they can give you active buffs, they can give you a lot of things. There are Tarstones for your character that increase crit chance or finisher damage. They give you stats or they make you more tanky. There are those stones that are used in your weapons. They decrease stagger on you when you get attacked. They make certain weapons hit twice, or they maybe inflict specific ailments. Then there are buff stones which do what they say. They can buff your weapons with all sorts of effects that do something to your character or your enemy. You know, either you just do more damage, or you attack faster, or you gain health on kills. And then there are skill stones that add unique skills to guns or weapons. You have a charged shot, a charged light or a charged heavy attack, some sort of AoE attack, a jump attack, and most of these stones are not universal. They are limited to specific weapons. And these stones are cool in theory, if only they were not limited by a stupid upgrade system again. You level them up by using them. So far, so good. At a specific XP breakpoint, you can upgrade them to the next tier by using money first. So the first upgrade only costs money. But then, to upgrade them to tier 3, you need a specific resource you can only get by upgrading other Tarstones. So, in order to upgrade a stone to tier 3, you likely need to play around and level up a bunch of other stones to tier 2 in order to generate the upgrade material. So that means you need to run around with some stones on your weapon that you might not use in order to upgrade the other stones to tier 3. That is not a good system. You have a giant open world map filled with thousands of trash consumables as loot, and not at one point in time did any developer think to maybe just put some of these upgrade materials in the world instead of putting 500 mushrooms in the swamp. So essentially, you will be stuck with a bunch of tier 2 stones unless you willingly equip shitty stones you don't want or need in order to level and upgrade it to generate a unique resource for tier 3. What a dumb system. I'm starting to see a pattern here with this development studio. Let's move on to the consumables and the materials. Speaking about consumables, the game has a shit ton. Most of them don't really do much. They cure ailments, which is fine, but the enemies, especially late game, can do so much damage to you that a little bit of poison or lightning damage isn't going to do much because you're gonna get 3-shotted or 2-shotted anyway. However, the healing mushrooms, specifically, once you have fully upgraded them, can actually heal 50% of your HP. So, the more HP you have, the more effective this gets. You can only use them twice before, having to rest, but this makes the HP recovery mushrooms actually more useful on high health characters than the active healing skill. All the other consumables I never actively used or felt like I needed them. However, you can put consumables in an active slot and in a passive slot. Passive slot items give nice resistances against an element or effect. So at least that means these can get some uses even if you don't actively use them. So I guess when you're in an icy area, equip the passive ice cure consumable. How do you upgrade their usefulness? By just collecting them. Yep, you don't have to actually use them, you just have to keep on picking them up, and eventually they get more and more useful effects, which makes some passive items pretty good, especially a specific secret item that you can get from a familiar location in the game. This one is kind of helpful for the final fight, but it's not really totally needed, but the secret was kind of cool, so you get kind of a neat little bonus for the final boss fight if you do that secret. You heal like you would normally expect in a Souls game. You have an item, it refills when resting, you upgrade the uses and effectiveness by finding the items in the world. Same with the crafting upgrades, all of the stones are found in the world and the dungeons, and eventually you can get rid of upgrade level restrictions of weapons in the endgame, and you can upgrade the weapon as much as you want, provided you have the money and the resources to do it, which is kinda neat. Oh yeah, the healing in this game is kinda shit. It heals very little, and this means character that had naturally a lot of health just need to heal like 3 times in a row to top off, which also means that high health at some point becomes kind of irrelevant, because if you need like 4 pots to heal, what's the point? It's kind of bad considering shells have vastly different health pools. And all of that culminates in combat difficulty and balancing. Well, here we are, the most contentious topic of a Souls game, and this one is a doozy. I played this game before the big day 1 patch came out that apparently nerfed the game. Well, not precisely. So, apparently, the developers got feedback from that crowd of Souls players that the beta was too easy. So, they massively fixed the enemies from the beta, leading to a crushing early game for certain people. I did not play the demo or the beta, so I have no clue what the difference in scaling is. What I can say is that the game mostly feels inconsistent in its difficulty application. What do I mean by that? Well, some enemies in the overworld seemingly do half of my HP in 1 hit. Even some enemies that feel like they should act as swarmers, or that they shouldn't do that much damage. The flying creatures in the beginning had like a shotgun attack that could just outright one-shot you if you got hit by all of the projectiles. Then there are little stone creatures that litter some areas, and they all do like a simultaneous jumping attack that can do like 50% of your HP at kind of all points in the game. Then there's some dudes, some little guys with a torch that can absolutely waste you. But then for some reason in a dungeon, the same enemies, or enemies that feel like they should be dangerous, they just don't do the same amount of damage. Like there are these big night enemies with halberds, and outside of the dungeon they do like twice the amount of damage, but then inside of a dungeon they do way less damage. In general, the damage is kind of completely inconsistently applied. A guy wielding 2 little dinky knives can combo you to death in 3 hits, and he also has a 50-hit combo, while you can take multiple hits from a big ass weird tentacle creature, and that doesn't do the same amount of damage, even though it's a much bigger enemy. And then there's a lady with a rapier that can parry you, which already does a shit ton of damage, and then she follows up with a 50 stab combo, but the first 2 hits of that combo have already killed you. So I feel like the devs just had no clue how to properly balance the difficulty, and then they did 2 knee-jerk reactions. First, they buffed everything after the beta and likely messed the balancing up. Then they walked it back for the release, and now nobody is really happy about it. What do we learn from that? Fuck, I don't really know, man. I feel like a lot of this is due to Elden Ring and the influence that From Software had on this genre and the community, and lesser developers still struggle with kind of hitting that sweet spot of difficulty. On the topic of difficulty, there is the Slayer seal, which makes the game easier apparently, and then there is the night mechanic from the first game, which makes the game even harder. So they did have difficulty modulation built in and still decided to mess around with the base balancing of the enemies, and apparently judged judging from their first patch, they are not done with rebalancing the game. Well, dear developers, I will just tell you that this is going to piss off a certain crowd of players if you continue to do so. And I'm all for pissing these people off, but you're gonna get some pretty salty Steam comments. On the topic of night mode difficulty, I did run the Hexapod dungeon on night mode, which is a late game area, and basically you no longer get 3 shot by enemies, you just get 1 shot by enemies. And I'm not really sure if this is intended or fun or balanced in any way, shape or form, but then again, I'm not really a Slop agony masochist enjoyer. All in all, the balancing in this game is a bit of a mess, and I guess we will come back to some of these aspects in the issues and gripe sections of the review, but let's move on to enemy design. Enemies in this game, well, let's say that there is a medium amount of enemy variety in this game. However, get ready to see multiple variations of crawling exploder enemy, big wood creature, slow zombie with a one-handed weapon, soldier with a one-handed weapon, halberd soldier, greatsword soldier, big halberd soldier, brute enemy, ranged spam archers, and basically almost every enemy from the first game, only tuned up to fit the second game's balancing. So you will see a lot of the same enemies over and over, especially once you transition from the north to the south and to the late game. There's a lot of recycling going on there. In dungeons, you will see bigger enemies as bosses, which is expected. At least some of these have like a unique look to them. But yeah, a lot of similar enemies getting spammed out, especially late game. And the final game areas just recycle a bunch of elite enemies and bosses as normal enemies to make it extra hard. However, there are some unique late game creatures, which is good. Too bad that these are really annoying to deal with. Like for example, these spiders that have 2 distinct grab attacks. One of them is a ranged grab attack and the game spams them in this one dungeon. So enjoy a big booty lady getting repeatedly violated by a gaggle of spiders for your enjoyment. Visually, some of these enemies sometimes make sense in the areas that they're in. You know, knights are in castles, cultists are out in the woods, creatures are in caves, but then sometimes it gets a little bit weird and silly later on, where they clearly ran out of material. You see like a woodland cultist running around in the otherworldly Gate of Infinity. I'm not sure he belongs there. He's not even reskinned or something. It's just the random cultist from the beginning of the game. He's just here now. Some of the boss design also feels strangely goofy and weird, like somehow the bosses don't seem to belong in the areas that they are in. There's an insect boss in kind of a monolith dreamlike area. It looks like it's not even from this plane of existence. It's like an alien landscape. And you would expect maybe some sort of construct boss in there, you know, some sort of sentient rock. But it's just a fly with a sword and a shield. Okay, there's a big ass shitting barfing baby at the end of like a bloody area. Okay, I guess. Then there is a granny in a turbo wheelchair in a glade. Her backstory is strange too. It all sounds like it's a tragic tale of the protective matron of the forest succumbing to corruption. So you might expect like a forest spirit. And then there is Turbo Granny in her rocket boosted wheelchair. It's goofy, it's cool, but does it fit the vibe of the game? I don't know. The game's story comes across as serious, and then some of the bosses and the design comes across as distinctively comedic. Overall though, the enemy design is fine. Their behavior though, we will talk about that in the big gripe section because I have some very personal subjective thoughts. Story. What the hell am I reading? I think I just had an aneurysm looking at this. That tablet has got to be the most out of left field fourth wall break I've ever seen in a game. What the hell is this? So the story. Let me paint you the full picture real quick. You have lived a good life, maybe the best, but now you have moved on to a different plane. You hear the distant beep of an expired fire alarm and you awake in a strange world. Our day's afterlife adventure begins here. Kinda fucked up that he got revived in this pale white body though. Maybe it's punishment for the crimes on the mortal plane. Although our main character here is a good NB representation because he's got no boobs and no dick. Literally gender neutral Kendall. Besides the jokes, the story is a continuation of the first game. The character from the first game is actively included in some of the remembrance cutscenes from Sester Genessa's memories. Very lore relevant stuff in the shell memories, by the way. Another reason that limiting access to these is not a cool idea. Anyway, the foundling in the first game laid the foundation, get it, for the arrival of the big mummy from space. She's like an intergalactic traveling god or some such. She crashed on this world and immediately the inhabitants began to pillage her bones and innards. However, she carried an intergalactic parasite with her that breaks free and corrupts the world as well as all of her offspring. Your job is to fight back the corruption and bring back the eggs to ensure that there is no empty egg carton. You do so by beating the shit out of former protectors or thieves of the eggs and bring them back. You cleanse corrupted areas of the world and eventually you descend below your hub area into the final zone where you find and fight the actual corruption at its source, and eventually you find it and excise the parasite and kill it. That is the very short version of the story. Obviously there is much more to this. For example, the world is very clearly the same as in the first game, only some of the areas of the first game have been severely changed. There's even the tower with the final boss from the first game in there too for you to find, and there's a neat little secret to unveil here too, which will help you a little bit with fighting the final boss. They very definitively kept the best bosses for these big corruption dungeons. The final fights in these areas are very obviously the highlights of the game and also the most difficult part of the experience. The final area in particular turns up the difficulty to 11, more on that though in the gripes section, and the final boss isn't actually a shitty pushover. So yeah, the story-wise, the game is pretty nice. Lots of, vague lore and item descriptions to read. It's a Souls game. You're gonna read notes, you're gonna read item descriptions, there's lore, but at least the main story progression, that path is pretty well telegraphed and told to the player. The rest is up for the Norlerds to figure out. Music. What can I say about the sound design? Well, sometimes the sound bugs out and then no sound cues play, but overall the sound design in the game is good. The music, however, is not very interesting. It feels like they used the same ambient, kind of dark metal-ish sounding track for almost all bosses. It started to kind of totally blend together after a while. A little bit uninspired, but maybe they did not have the budget, or maybe they wanted to use this type of ambient music. I like dark ambience, but it does tend to kind of blend together with itself. And I'm pretty sure a lot of bosses just have one generic combat track that plays for all of them. Even the final boss felt like I heard that OST before. So in this game, the music is actually not much to write home about. Sadly, the areas have some light ambient tracks, that's about it. The boss music leaves a lot to be desired, but maybe this isn't always needed. I feel like a good Souls game at least has good boss OSTs, usually, and Mortal Shell does not. The first game did it not, and the second game also didn't do it. Art design. The art design is very much the highlight of the game. The grungy metal design of some of the weapons, some of the nonsensical torn and otherworldly designs of the world. It really gave me Dark Souls 2 vibes. Especially some of the dungeons that just transition you from one location to another that makes zero sense. And as I've already laid out, the designs of some of the bosses feels a bit style over substance, or rather I question why some of the bosses are in the areas that are in. Some of these design aspects and choices don't really fit together all too well. If I had to describe the game world, it feels very pieced together. It's a lot of islands connected by hundreds of rope bridges, or these teleporter gates, and there are arbitrarily gated in the beginning by corruption. Only in the north of the map though. Corruption that you can cleanse, but if you go south early game, there is no corruption gates there and you can kind of go wherever you please. I wonder why that mechanic is in the game, but then it's only really used in the northern part of the map. Maybe they did run out of time there in the end. But yeah, I don't really have big complaints or opinions on the visual style. It's an Unreal game, and if you look very closely, you will see the Unreal quirks in the game: strange artifacting, ghosting, blurring and fuzzing around the characters, and really weird looking snow. I almost feel sick looking at this. It feels like I'm walking on like a static monitor or something. Yeah, it's an Unreal Engine game, but they did tried to optimize it quite well, and they did a lot with the design, so I gotta hand it to them at least. Now we come to the gripes, the issues, and personal complaints. Now it's time for all of the unsorted or negative aspects of my review. Some of these are highly personal and very subjective. That is why I kind of grouped all of this into its own category. But some of these might genuinely be big issues for you. And let's be honest, bugs and glitches are something that is just objectively bad. And these things, I hope, should be fixed by the developers in time. Some of the cutscenes in the game feel like they are stuttering or running on a much lower frame rate than actually shown, and they had some very definitive Unreal Engine 5 stutters in-game and in cutscenes for some reason. The game also had some nasty 1-second freezes too, usually only happens once after starting the game up. These stuttering issues do subside quickly though, and I did not have a single crash. There is Unreal Engine 5 stuttering. It happens mostly, again, on the south side of the map, which I assume also was finished later, and likely again the developers had less time to optimize this area, which is also reflected in some of the enemy balancing in this part of the game. DLSS defaults to balanced, and motion blur is off by default. That's another good point for the developers. Motion blur off by default is good, and the graphics seem to default to medium, which is interesting. It seems they are trying to play it safe, setting everyone to medium and then turning DLSS on. Or maybe my game is bugged, but it seems that there is no hardware recognition. The game ran totally fine on high settings for me, so it is reasonably optimized. I don't know why it defaulted me to medium settings. The availability of checkpoints in this game is rather rare, which brings tension to the exploration, but I feel like not putting a checkpoint next to a dungeon entrance was a weird choice. Dungeons in general feel strange. They range from pretty expansive areas to literally a room with 4 enemies and the chest with some money in it. Some dungeons I wondered why they even had that transition screen happen. It's pretty clear that either these were not finished or something else happened here. Especially again in the south area of the map, a lot of the dungeons here are kinda just a corridor and a room, and then there is a chest. Also, I hope you like this particular elevator, because it's pretty much in every dungeon entrance. The exceptions to this rule are obviously the main dungeons in the game, but a lot of the side dungeons I feel could have just been open connected rooms instead of being behind this fog gate transition. It's a little bit weird. Also, some of the dungeons are really, and I mean really fucking dark, to the point where you can't see shit anymore. And as you expect, these dungeons are full of traps. Bear traps that are hard to see and you need to shoot, or you try to hit them in order to permanently disable them. And sometimes your ranged weapon refuses to lock onto the trap. Then there are explosive barrels that somehow explode when you dodge into them. And most traps also knock you back, which was done deliberately to knock you off ledges into death pits. Talking about falling and falling damage, the amount of gravity deaths that I had in this game is staggering. Not only are you sometimes just forced to eat fall damage, but I did lose my souls permanently multiple times to a fall, because I assume the pickup ends up outside of the map and then it's kind of gone. It's still displayed on the map, but you can't find it anywhere. It's just gone. Also, you can deliberately kill yourself by accidentally doing a riposte or a heavy attack too close to a ledge. The riposte in general looks cool, but it's wonky in many cases, and you are also locked in an animation, and in a lot of situations you can get yourself killed because you end up with the back turned to your attackers. And yes, I totally flung myself off of ledges with the finisher multiple times. And the same goes for attacks. Enemies, as well as you, have insane forward momentum with their attacks, to the point where enemies sometimes slide and teleport across the floor. And you can very easily overshoot while fighting an enemy on a bridge and dive to your death, because one of your attack strings had this insane forward momentum to it. I also feel like the devs took the wrong lessons from other games in the genre and handed almost every enemy an instant startup flurry attack. The amount of flailing some of the enemies in this game do is crazy. The ramifications of Elden Ring and the consequences of lesser developers applying the Souls formula to games without understanding proper balancing. Thank God you have a no-cost parry and there is no stamina in this game. Still, I feel like this game has Dark Souls 2 levels of enemy spam in certain areas, and they aggro onto you from miles away. Not only that, I had several enemies follow me through half the levels, so their leash range seems insane too, unless this was fixed at some point. But yes, this is a game where a run back can turn into tedium because you probably don't want to run past enemies unless you know where the next checkpoint is, so you can instantly reset the enemy positions. I also feel like putting 5 dangerous enemies in a hole and calling that a boss encounter is also quite cheap. They really like to mix enemies together that should not be in a small room with each other, and there is almost zero friendly fire. One other reason why Teal is such a good character, because he can essentially turn the AI from one boss off and focus on the other one. Some of these multi-enemy encounters were not thought out properly, not balanced well, and not playtested. You can't tell me that the room with 50 spiders that have all high mobility, ranged grab attacks and a jump grab attack, and they all spam the attacks, and they're all fast as hell, and they're all essentially elite enemies. None of this was playtested. No one looked at this and went, that makes sense. That's a good idea to put in the game. There was no thought about this besides, let's make it difficult. This is just amateur hour game balancing. One of the worst aspects. Also, get ready to read notes. Many notes. 500 notes. There are notes to read everywhere in this game, and I am not a big fan of this type of storytelling, and I just will leave it at that. The game does not have a jump, and by default, the game maps the run button to the interact button. Yes, you already know what that means. You accidentally want to run, but you end up interacting with something next to you. Especially annoying when you are walking away from a checkpoint. So try to rebind this as fast as you can. You have a home base, like in every Souls game, with an open world nowadays, and this one is annoying to navigate. This game has the habit of areas being thematically different, but then within these areas a lot of stuff looks the same, so you end up turned around or you don't know if you already went there. And the main hub is no different. You do at least unlock fast travel at some point, thank God, but I still feel like, if you have Dark Souls runbacks in your game in 2026, you have missed some important lessons in the development and innovation of this genre. Runbacks are not fun. They are not engaging or riveting. Putting them in the game while so many other developers have shown how to do it better tells me either this is a very insulated development team or someone did literally not take any lessons learned from other titles within the genre. I feel like the shell mechanic of getting knocked out of your shell is in a lot of cases also totally irrelevant. A lot of the bosses can straight up kill you through your shell's health and the health of the Harbinger. So what's even the point of the second health bar then? Grab attacks are especially bad in this aspect. They have really shitty and precise hitboxes, and most enemies have insane tracking on their grabs, and in the end game these are usually outright a one-shot kill. Some grab attacks even feel specifically designed to kill your shell and then you, as they have like a 3-hit combination with a deliberate pause at the final hit as you are just coming out of your shell in order to combo you to death. Attacks also do stunlock you, essentially ending up with a true combo you can't do anything against, which usually is also an instant kill too, due to there being no protection for you when you fall out of your shell. There is also no protection when you are knocked over, and sometimes you cannot do a quick recovery when using the dodge button. You just lie on the ground while being pounded, which in certain situations feel very much intended as kind of another wombo combo. Think of it as kind of the Manos combo attacks or the somersault of Artorias, only a lot of bosses and enemies have these moves, especially if enemies can also harry you. The ladies in the Cester Keep especially, they will parry you, then they will go on a 50 combo stabbing spree. While you are already dead, they are still stabbing the air while you lie there already deceased. The enemies also switch aggro to you instantly. Even though there are skirmishes of different factions fighting each other, they will instantly go for you if you are nearby. Yes, they will even ignore the other enemy currently bashing their brains in from behind. Very strange AI behavior, and it feels needlessly annoying. Why put these encounter in there if everything aggroes towards you anyway? Also, what's the point of the confusion effect on the loot if everything still only attacks you? Aspects of the lore and stories seem to be locked behind the shell memories and therefore limited. This is not a good decision to make. These games live by their lore and stories. Having to go through multiple new game cycles to get vital information from the memories feels like another arbitrary goating attempt to make you replay the game. In certain areas and dungeons, they straight up forgot to add a recoil lever for the lift, so you either have to jump or you can't just use the lift anymore from this side. In one of the main dungeons, the lift also gets disabled after taking it up because there is a boss fight up in the room. But why does it not work again after the boss fight is over? There's almost no poise in this game. Enemies have arbitrarily hyper armor applied to their attacks. Funnily, a lot of the instant start flailing attacks seem to have hyper armor on them, so you can get stun locked to death if you don't dash out or use your active defense, but the enemies get to do their combo attacks. Unless you use the Tarstone that prevents staggers on all attacks, of course. That would require this Tarstone to be upgraded to tier 3, which I cannot do because I don't want to level useless stones in order to get the crafting materials. A lot of the red warning attacks, the perilous attacks in the game feel wildly differently balanced and badly telegraphed, and some bosses absolutely spam these. So what's the point of your cool seal and your riposte mechanic if these bosses all spam unblockable attacks? It got so silly that in one boss fight the warning sound literally started overlapping itself. I don't know, man, if you cannot make the bosses difficult unless they spam unblockables, this just feels a bit cheap. Weapon upgrades get really expensive and really fucking fast. I had 2 weapons reasonably upgraded and 1 weapon fully upgraded, and I was trying to farm money. Apparently though, this was already fixed again and enemies now drop way more money than before. No idea how this didn't get discovered early, but I guess this happens if you don't have proper QA testing. I don't know, man. They had the beta and they had a demo. They had all of this, and I'm assuming they have QA testers. Yet still there is so much bad balancing in this game. It's weird. Did the beta testers give them shit feedback? Why is all of this happening still happening now? Well, at least it's not in the release day. You know, the day 1 patch fixed a lot of this stuff. It's another game that needs the day 1 patch to be reasonably enjoyable. Without the day 1 patch, I would have told you to wait before buying this. There is a lot of animation locking in this game. Heavy attacks lock you in, skills lock you in, riposte animations lock you in, and in a lot of cases this ends up with you taking damage or you can't press the healing button. The amount of times I had to absolutely hammer the shit out of the heal button or the dodge button after executing a skill or a heavy attack only for the game to just not register the input is crazy. So yes, we have input lags and input issues in this game too. No Souls game apparently is spared from this. And the camera. The camera is also again a boss on its own. Sometimes the lock on goes to the wrong enemy, and in certain fights the camera kind of does what it wants. In some fights zoom the camera out, which is good, and sometimes it just doesn't zoom out, which is bad. A Souls game where the camera isn't good. Never heard that before. And yes, I have been killed during the riposte animation too, even though you are supposed to take no damage during your cinematic finishing moves. Some of the late game bosses also feel like they were balanced with the philosophy of topping Elden Ring, or at least attempting to make a Melania or a Consort Radahn. And all of these attempts end up as the most tedious and bad feeling fights in the game, that you just end up cheesing to win with overpowered shell abilities. These enemies just relentlessly spam and spam and spam attacks and litter the screen with effects or have almost unreactable crap they throw at you within a millisecond, and they have unreasonably high amounts of health to boot. This feels like an attempt to kind of chase that shadow of the Erdtree difficulty level without really knowing or having the skill on how to make it actually work out and feel good. This game ain't no Lies of P, not at all close to the quality of that. And it's not close to the quality of actual From Software games. I mean, duh. It falls short in so many aspects, from certain very restricted leveling and upgrading mechanics that feel archaic after this genre has been so thoroughly explored by other developers. And we have all the hallmarks of From Slop issues. Inconsistent enemy damage, weapons feeling kind of interchangeably because there is 0 stats that a weapon could scale off of, then wobbly and a floaty combat with insane momentum on attacks, glitching off of ledges, insane enemy spam and recycling, and it absolutely needed to be an open world because Elden Ring was an open world and Elden Ring is the hype. In the attempt to make something difficult, they just made certain encounters tedious and unfun. From the Dark Souls runbacks to horrendous spam boss fights, I feel like, especially in the late game, Mortal Shell really starts to overstay its welcome. A dev studio clearly not knowing how to properly balance the game, and instead of adding a difficulty selection, which is more easy for lesser developers, they add a weird seal that disables achievements. Then they nerf and buff and nerf the game like 3 different times. And also there's a night mechanic too, which this just feels like absolute overkill in certain areas. If night mode is supposed to be the difficulty mode for masochists, then why did you fuck around with the base level? And yet, even though all of this is in place, the fact that the Tarstones exist and the fact that the different abilities on the shells exist, it means that just as in Remnant 2, people will find and make builds on shells and weapons that absolutely fucking mog the game, no matter if you're on the hardest difficulty or not, because I can already predict there is some sort of busted shit in there. I already know that the monk apparently can just freeze time repeatedly and just punch bosses to death without taking any damage for himself. So the fact that there's so much build crafting in this game probably means that you will see shit getting cheesed. Oh yeah, that's another point. Some skills from your shells don't work on bosses, or the boss is arbitrarily immune during certain phases, or your skill just misfires, or it just won't activate. I have missed backstabs with Teal, and Proxima's hookshot just randomly doesn't work. Sometimes it doesn't work on normal enemies too. It's not just bosses, sometimes your skills just don't work. So on top of all of the systemic issues and balancing, the game is also very, very buggy at times. And I felt like, even though I only played for like 32 hours, certain sections of the game did drag on a lot, especially if they reused the same enemies just with a different coat of paint over and over again. They are making fixes to the game. They are patching it, which is good, but why does it always have to be this way? Especially the shitty, like the difficulty scaling, the back and forth. What do you want as a dev team? Do you want it to be harder than the beta or not? What is your intended difficulty? Why did you instantly walk all of the changes back for the release? Is it because the Get Good crowd is actually just a small, annoying minority that everyone hates, and you would much rather take the casual money than to cater to the toxic, low self-esteem player base? Is it that why you walked it all back? Then why did you tune up all of the enemies in the first place? You know how all of this is going to be taken by the players. The vast majority of people who play these games are still casuals. The Get Good crowd is like less than 2%. Why did you cater to the 2% and then walk everything back? It's just kind of goofy. Is it because you don't actually know what you're doing? Yes. The answer to that is probably yes. Then just add a difficulty selection. If you can't do it, if you can't modulate your difficulty, then just add a difficulty option. Like the whole single difficulty mode is for developers who can actually correctly do it. If you can't do it, just do easy, normal, hard. Anyway, enough griping. I did enjoy aspects of the game, although towards the end some of the systemic issues, the bugs and the irksome kinks became more apparent and annoying to me. I hope the more they patch and fix the game, the more enjoyable it becomes. And who knows, now that the shell system is kind of fixed, maybe I can actually try and run the game with different builds and shells again in New Game Plus. I think I'll just get a mod that removes restrictions on shell points and glimpses and just have fun with it. Should you play this game? Well, are you a really big FromSoft fan and you can't get enough and you don't like that Duskbloods is stuck on the Switch? Maybe get this game. If you're on the fence, wait for more balance and system patches, and overall the game is playable and enjoyable at times. So it just has those AA issues and the inherent problems present in Souls games that usually happen because literally no studio in existence has the experience that From Software has. So yeah, partially it's understandable that some of the things are kind of not that good. I just wonder why some obvious improvements and lessons learned from the 200 other Souls-likes out there were not taken into account with this game. If you really want to try this, go ahead. If not, wait for a sale, wait for the patches, and if you don't want to do that too, there is always a way. Just ask this nice looking guy with a peg leg. And that's it for me. I wish Arday a good eternal stay in his afterlife, and I will see you next time.
destroy the child.